Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Maren and I'm an aspiring novelist and filmmaker, and this is my channel where I mostly talk about writing, but I may also talk about other things pertaining to creativity. But today I just wanted to touch in. I think that I'm going to add a lot more to this video. I really want to do a bit of a deep dive into my process of creating characters, which is kind of embarrassing and vulnerable, but I think it would be potentially helpful for people or potentially valuable. And also it would give me a chance to kind of gush about how much I love my characters and gush about how they've sort of taken shape and how I've come to know them. And so look forward to that later in this video. But for now, I just wanted to talk a little bit about where I'm at as far as my goal for NaNoWriMo, which was 85,000 words by the end of the month. And right now it is November 21st. And the likelihood of me achieving that goal is pretty slim, but right now I'm at around 52,000 words. And I have reached the point in the book that is the most broken by far. And by broken, I mainly mean it's like Swiss cheese. There's just holes and I haven't combined it all together and really written it in a coherent way. When I was doing draft 2, I left a lot of breaks. Anytime I was just stuck, I was just move on to the next scene that works. And I kept doing that. And I think that was a good practice for me at the time because I really just needed to figure out what the story was. I was doing a bit of exploration while also having an outline that I was following and things like that. But there were just certain scenes that just weren't working for me and I couldn't figure out why. And for whatever reason, it's I've just been able to power through a lot more with this draft, but it has been taking me a bit longer. And now that I'm at the point where it's less revising and it's more drafting, it is just taking me a lot longer. Today, this morning, I've only done 850 words, which is just pretty abysmal, but it's just part of the process is just figuring out, having these slower days and having longer days. I mean, I've had some days where it's I've drafted 2,000 words and revised 3,000 words. And so I've had some really productive days. But act 2 and 3 are the ones where the most changes need to happen. And so I'm trying to give myself a little bit of grace, knowing that I have been at least working every day. I have worked on the book every single day this month. I think that that's good progress. I sort of wish that I would have gone into the month with some more stringent goals and stuck to them a little bit more. I think had I had the foresight to remember and realize that act 1 is going to be the easiest part and the quickest part, so I should probably get that done faster, I think that I would probably be farther along. But instead it's kind of I finished act 1 kind of at the halfway point of the month, and it was girl, you got to go a little faster than that because that's the easiest part. There was a lot more copying and pasting and revising than drafting in Act 1. I still did a lot of drafting, actually. And one of the things that I also have noticed, which is cool, is I am not even at the midpoint yet. And my draft is only 15,000 words shorter than all of draft 2. Draft 2 ended up being only 67,000 words before I was okay, I need to set this draft aside and start on draft 3 because I know now what's wrong and what needs to change. And so I'm not so worried anymore about my word count being low for the genre or anything like that. I think that I'm actually kind of right on the money, which is awesome. Sorry, I'm nasally right now. I don't know what my problem is. I'm feeling good about that. I've really beefed up the draft. I've added a lot more description. I've improved the prose a little bit. I still kind of think that the prose is something that's going to come in a later draft. I really still just sort of feel getting the action down, getting the story, getting the character beats down. That's the thing that I think I'm still kind of more focusing on. And this draft is primarily for beta readers. And so I want it less to be a reflection of how beautiful I can make the prose and be more about does this story work? Do you like the characters? Is this going in the right direction? And so, yeah, just before I sort of roll into my character breakdown and explaining how I do my characters and what that process looks like, I just kind of wanted to give a brief update on NaNoWriMo. I'm really busy right now in my life, and so this is sort of the thing that's falling by the wayside, falling to the back burner. But I'm glad that I had a moment today to sort of just check in and, talk about how I am behind, but at the same time, I think that that's okay. And I'm also, I'd be curious what people think about this, but I am aware that, it might be the case that it's like I finished this draft on like December 15th or something like that, like halfway through December. And I'm a little concerned that if I'm soliciting beta readers over Christmas and the holidays, that's going to be a mistake. And so I'm trying to just, figure out, like, should I just like adjust my timeline? Is December just like kind of a bad time for beta readers? I don't have any experience with this, so I would be curious to know if anyone who's listening or watching does have experience and they know that it's like, yeah, that's a time when people are just like doing other things and they're not going to be paying attention and they're not going to be wanting to beta read a book. Or alternatively, I also feel like people have more downtime during the holidays and might actually like have the ability to beta read. Anyway, that is something that I'm curious about. I'm not opposed necessarily to having beta readers over January and February. I'm going to be abroad all of February, so I'd rather not be thinking too much about the book, but it could be the case that, maybe I draft book 2, or maybe I start drafting book 2 in January and in February, and I'm just kind of letting the beta readers do their thing, and I'm just sort of like in book 2. That could be a potentially reasonable choice. I'm not sure. but yeah, I'm curious what other people think. So right now in my drafting phase, my drafting and revising, I'm currently in the sort of like fun and games or like tests portion of the book, which is also very much wrapped into the romantic subplot. And honestly, like, I love the romance in my book. Oh, it's like so yearning. There's so much yearning and like just tension and like this sort of like, I don't know. It's really potent. I'm a little worried though, like, because one of my problems is like, I don't want this book series to feel like, for lack of a better word, like too girly. Like, actually, I really want it to be something that's like men and women alike really love this and resonate with the characters and the story and blah, blah, blah. So it's like, I'm nervous. That's one of the main things I'm going to be asking my beta readers, especially my male beta readers, is like, is this romance like too much? And right now, I don't necessarily think it is. I think it's like, I think that it adds, it's not just for like no reason. And not to say that there's anything wrong with having romance just for the sake of having romance, but it does like propel the story forward. And there are like things that help break down and elucidate the characters more through the romance. But so this part is like, I think when I was doing draft 2, I was really struggling with this part because I'm having to weave a lot of different things together. It's like, not only has my main character, Nairi, entered this sort of like upside down world, she's crossed the threshold on her hero's journey and she's in this new world, but there's also this romantic subplot that I want to weave through. But then there's also this layer of, she's learning about the world that she's been raised in. She's learning about the fall of civilization, and she's learning about all of these processes that she didn't know about. And then also having these sort of like training montages and things like that this part of books usually has to sort of like, you're preparing the character for like the journey ahead and things like that. And so there's a lot of work being done in all of these different directions. At first, I was kind of wanting there to be quite a didactic part of it, sort of akin to Daniel Quinn's Ishmael, where it's like, you sort of know that Ishmael is Daniel Quinn teaching you, the reader, about these things and like through this like mythological valence. And actually for me, I feel like that really works. I know for some people that they felt kind of like lectured to when they read that book. But for me, I like that. But then I just started thinking, like, I was just worried about it screeching the pacing to such a halt that, we enter Act 2 and then all of a sudden it's just like fucking lectures and lessons and stuff. And so I've decided to like weave it through a lot more naturally. Like, things are being brought up in conversation. There are still lessons, but it's a lot more organic, I think, because the reality is it's like the people, like, I know for me, I spend a lot of time in my personal life, like, talking about philosophical things. So it doesn't feel like totally unnatural to me that people would be having these really, really deep conversations just like casually. And so that's kind of more what I'm leaning into, is giving plenty of space for those sorts of conversations. And then also, Nairi is a very like sheltered person, and she really doesn't have access to the knowledge, which is kind of why I'm starting the book series with her. Is it's like, letting the reader go on the journey with her, understanding a bit of the world before we then sort of branch out into some of these other main characters and allowing the reader to see the world through their eyes, which is a more educated, more worldly perspective than we have from Nairi. So yeah, so it's been fun. Whereas I think before, when I was doing draft 2, this section really intimidated me. I think I didn't feel confident in my skills at the time to be able to weave all of these different things together. And so I kind of just didn't. I just like skipped through it and just, left all of these holes knowing where I was eventually going to go. But the other thing too is that I've decided to weave in more action in this section that I had originally, because again, I just felt like, the beginning is like very propulsive and almost like borderline like too propulsive. Like I really like spent a lot of time this month like slowing down the pacing as much as I can, because it was just so fast. Like that was like the main number one note that I had for myself was like, oh my God, girl, slow down. My thing with this book is like, I want this to be an accessible book. I want this to be like fairly commercial with like a lot of really deep messages within it. And I want it to be something that people are like, I don't want to put this down. I want to know what happens. And so, for me, it's like really important to be considering the reader all the time while I'm writing this and being like, okay, I don't want the pacing to be so fast that they're like, oh my God, this is like so speedy. I can't even pay attention to what's going on. It's like, I don't even know what's happening. And so I want to make sure that that's not happening. But I also didn't want to like slam the brakes super hard in this upside down world, in the belly of the whale sort of section. And so I'm trying to find a balance. I'm trying to strike a healthy medium. And so one of the things that I have decided to do also, initially I wasn't going to do this at all, but then I realized I think I'm going to have like Zia is my male main character. You'll learn more about him later in this video. I wanted to sort of start incorporating some scenes from his perspective. And so I have a few chapters outlined that are going to be from his perspective, and allowing myself that space and knowing that like, this book is still like 95% from Nairi's perspective. It allowed me a little bit of like, I don't know, it just made me feel like even more inspired to write certain scenes and then add in certain sequences, because it was just kind of like, wow, if I can break out of her perspective for a moment, I can show her character from a completely different angle than I have been showing her, because, we don't know exactly how we impact other people. We may have a hunch, or we may be able to guess, but oftentimes we don't have full clarity on like how we move through the world and how that affects other people. And so I had this idea for a scene that was from Zia's perspective. And I was like, whoa, this really helps elucidate so much of Nairi's character and the sort of contradictions within her character. And again, I'll get into this a little bit more later, but just sort of like from an archetypal standpoint, Nairi to me is like a mix between like Frodo and Arwen, which I know might sound very crazy, but she's this very like earthy, like nature-based person who has like a very deep spiritual connection to the land and to the world. And she's just like in this sort of like ebb and flow of life in this way that Zia isn't, because he's very cerebral. And because he basically grew up in a school. And so I wanted to be able to show that, but it's like, you can't really have Nairi reflecting on how like, spiritual and like earthy she is, because that's just like who she is. That's just like how she is in the world. And so I just thought it would be cool to like see a chapter from Zia's perspective. And then it just made me realize, I was like, God, like there's so much that I can do with these characters. And I love these characters. And I love, being able to show how each of them thinks about the other character. And just tying that in a little bit, I feel like it will just not only help with the yearning, but I think it will also help with the storytelling that I'm trying to evoke, because these two characters are meant to really balance each other out. They're meant to very much be a yin and yang character that like, very like sort of masculine, feminine, but like the sort of like more like divine masculine, divine feminine, or at least that's the character arcs that they're going to go for. They're going to go on, just to sort of give it away a little bit. Like, Zia is like the Aragorn character, he's like the ranger who needs to become king. And so, but he needs this like woman who will balance him out and help orient him and keep him sort of grounded to the world. And, additionally, Nairi, she has this like ignorance and naivete, and that's where the sort of Frodo thing comes in, is this like ordinary heroism, or this thing of being like propelled into the hero's journey, and yet she has this like saged wisdom within her. And it's more, her character arc throughout the series is more about like remembering who she is in the face of like peril and tragedy and all of these things. Like a lot of really bad stuff happens to her. So, you know, it's about like remembering this like Arwen, like, you know, this sort of like pillar of earthiness, groundedness, spirituality, like this divine feminine kind of like aspect within her. It's remembering that and not letting that be killed by what happens in the story. And so I know that those like two character archetypes might sound like super, super dissimilar, but like, you know, the thing about this story, and again, I'm going to get into this a little bit more in a bit, but the thing about this story is that I'm not like, I would never call this book series like a retelling of The Lord of the Rings. It's like, it's just very, very like inspired by The Lord of the Rings, but in a somewhat fragmented way. Like, it's like when I get lost or stuck, I think about The Lord of the Rings and I'm like, okay, so, you know, I need a Battle of Helm's Deep. Okay, I need Mines of Moria. Okay, I need these things. Like, that will help keep the story going within this structure that I really, really enjoy and I think is really effective. One of the things I've learned from YouTube and like specifically like John Fox's Book Fox, you know, he really encourages authors to be like, to not be so rigid about where they draw inspiration from. You know, it's like, I'm not gonna like, he said about story structure, he's like, you know, don't just do Save the Cat, like, you know, come up, grab a bunch of different structures and then mix it all together. And he's like, be a cook, not a baker. And I really like that. And I like that, you know, you can draw inspiration from all of these different places and, you know, it creates something that's really, really original. And so it's like, you know, I'm also drawing character archetypes from Andor, as I had said in a previous video. And I'm sure more and more things will be coming through. Like, I realized that it's like, oh man, there needs to be like an Éowyn character for books 2 and 3. And so I've like sort of started to form her. And, you know, she's this sort of like, you know, never mind. And so I've been crafting all of these different characters, recognizing, you know, like that there's so many different angles that I can explore this world from, and it's just going to make the story more rich to have more characters. And I know that can be like a bit of a pitfall too. Like, I could cause a lot of problems for myself by doing that, but it's just, you know, it's something that I'm exploring and experimenting with, and giving myself permission to have different points of view be like embedded within the book. And I think that adding Zia's POV in this book, which is something that I did not plan on doing, is actually just giving me a lot of space to be able to, you know, add in more dramatic irony and dramatic tension. And, you know, Nairi doesn't know things that Zia knows, and like, you know, and vice versa. And so, you know, I just think that as the author, I get to decide what the reader gets to experience. And I'm just having a lot of fun exploring that. And, you know, it's also is padding the book. It's definitely adding more pages, more words to the book, but it doesn't feel like it's just for no reason. And like I said before, I don't think I'm gonna have any trouble whatsoever reaching like around 100,000 words. Like, I'm not worried about that at all. I'm already like, I'm not even at the midpoint and I'm at 50,000 words. And so at this point I'm like, ooh, is this going to be even like too long? Maybe. So yeah, things are going really good. I'm having a lot of fun writing, again. And I'm excited about where this draft goes. And I just really look forward to getting beta readers. I'm scared of beta readers, though, to be honest. It's very vulnerable. Another question for the audience. Spice. What do we think about it? Because I can't help but to include it, it seems like, at least a little bit. It's not going to be crazy or anything, but like, it's just happening. I wouldn't say that I'm veering into like the overly explanatory sort of spicy scenes, but I'm definitely not a Fade to Black writer either. So I would be curious to see what people think about that. And again, is that something that's like a turn off for specifically like a male audience? Is that something that's going to be like, you know, I don't want to read something with spice. That sounds like, and at the same time, it's like, I know that I need to not worry so much about like I know I can't please everybody, and I'm aware of that. And so it's more just, I'm just out of curiosity, like if having spicy scenes in general is something that's going to make someone not want to read a book, even if it's like one paragraph or like 2 paragraphs or something. So yeah, curious about that. But anyway, let me give myself a little bit of a transition to the point of the video where I talk about my characters. Jake would be so horrified to see this lighting, but nevertheless, we're going to persist. So, as I had said before, I want to talk a little bit about how I make my characters. And this feels a little embarrassing to talk about and to admit, because although I'm sure other people do this too, but for some reason it feels kind of embarrassing to say this, because there's a level of dreamcasting that goes into how I craft my characters. Like I'm imagining it as if, my book got picked up for like a TV series or something like that. And so I'm like picking out these actors that I would love to be playing my characters. And so it's like a little embarrassing, especially since like some of these are like, some of the biggest actors in the whole world. And so it's like, yeah, like that's gonna happen, Maren. Good luck with that idea. But anyways, so to start, we should probably start with my female main character, which has been a little bit of a struggle, honestly. I was having a little bit of a hard time picturing her and picturing her behavior and picturing her attitude. And, as the drafts have gone on, I feel like I've gotten a little bit more clear on what her personality is and what she's like. But for some reason, her appearance sort of eluded me for a little while. I couldn't figure out what she looked like. And I knew that I wanted her to be pretty, like very beautiful, and to have like somewhat striking features, but also, when I was thinking of like who in my dream world would I want to like depict this character, I was thinking about the range that the actress would need to have. And so, I was thinking about actresses and, thinking about like, thinking about certain physicality as well. And I know that this is like not the most imaginative way to do characters, but this is just something that's working for me. As I think I've said before, it's like this is my first like real earnest attempt at finishing a story and finishing a series, finishing a book in general. So, I'm some people might consider that to be a bit of a shortcut, but it's like I'm sort of imagining it being like I'm collaborating with an actor in the crafting of a character, the same way that maybe a screenwriter would. Obviously, it's an actor that I'm not going to have access to, but anyway, regardless, wanting her to be able to express grief. And immediately when I thought of that, I thought of Florence Pugh's performance in Midsummer and her range that she has in like the way that she's able to shift between the emotions. And so Nairi, I always wanted her to be like not the classic like strong female character kind of trope that we're all sick of, where she's, sort of like masculine and tough and stoic and strong. I always knew that I wanted her to be fiery and independent and rebellious, but I also wanted her to have this sort of like inner peace and inner knowing and this sort of confidence within herself that expresses itself in sort of unique circumstances. But so essentially the story begins where a really big tragedy has befallen Nairi and her community. And very quickly she realizes that things are not as they seem and that her community is hiding something very important from her. And so we're immediately seeing in the story that Nairi has been very, very sheltered her entire life. And we slowly discover that it's because right around the time that she was born, like just after she was born, her community decided to create all of these taboos because something calamitous happened in that period of time that led them to be like, if we're going to protect our community, we need to insulate our community. We can't allow them to read. We can't allow them to have interactions with the outside world. And so this is something that, she's grown up within, and in small ways she's figured out how to resist against that. and rebel in these small ways. And mainly the way that she's rebelled has been through these like having like romances with people that she's been able to interact with from the outside world, and on very, very, very rare occasions, you know, like going to her cousin's village for a funeral, like finding a lover there and things like that. And so, you know, she sort of is just been slotted into place within her community, but she sort of feels like you know, she has like this curiosity and this longing to go explore the world and see what she's missing. And she is, you know, just sort of inherently resistant to the authority within her community. And, you know, one of the things that has been like really spurring her on in this story is that she is betrothed to someone in her community that she does not want to be married to. And again, that was another rule that was sort of incited, is it's like, you know, we're not going to have much interaction with outsiders, and therefore marriages will be arranged and they will be from within the community. You know, and part of the point of the story is, you know, there's a little bit of a question around, you know, like corruption and how do minds get corrupted? How do ideas sort of corrupt communities and things like that? And then also, you know, like what happens when you try to block people out from understanding the outside world? What happens to information? It's sort of an exploration on like how people interact with information, and, you know, the sort of idea that like people are always going to strive towards freedom, and that there's always going to be people who want to try to understand the world a little bit more. So when this tragedy befalls Nairi, it really sort of makes her realize like, oh my God, like I haven't been living, I haven't been true to myself. I've been sort of, you know, rebelling in these small ways, but I've been really keeping myself small. She just realizes that she's kind of been going along with the program because she doesn't know anything else. But, you know, this horrible thing that happens to her and her people, she realizes like, okay, like I feel actually really trapped and I feel really like stuck. She's meant to be married like 8 months from the point of the inciting incident. And so she sort of realizes like her window for freedom and exploration is really narrowing, because, you know, once she gets married, she's going to be expected to have kids, and she's going to be expected to like grow up and like be a part of the community and like be initiated into the community. And, you know, so that's sort of the ticking clock that she has. She's really torn between this sense of duty and also this exploration that she wants to undergo. So it's like, while she longs for a different life, she also like loves her people and her community and wants to protect them. And she's very loyal to her people. So there's a lot of inner tension for her as far as like being torn between duty and like being true to herself. And so, you know, that's where a lot of the tension comes in when she's like deciding whether she's going to go on her hero's journey or not. If you want this chapstick, I'll put a link in the show notes. It's our little small family business. So anyway, like, you know, her opening isn't, I think, that dissimilar to a lot of stories. It's not like the most original thing in the world, but I really do love her as a character. I think that she's really interesting, and I like writing a character who's very curious and very like excited about life, but also she has this like deeply spiritual like sense of connectedness to the earth, which is really fun, and it's been fun watching that sort of come through. She has this sort of like indigeneity to the land and to life and death, and like she just sort of has this like it's almost like magic, this sort of like mysticism that she just inherently has from the community that she was raised in. And so, you know, it's not that just that her community is like this sort of like oppressive society. It really isn't. It's like they are reacting to something that happened, and they made a mistake. They made a mistake by sort of closing off their community to the rest of the world. But anyway, so, you know, she crosses the threshold, and that's when she meets the male main character, Zia. And Zia has always been created in the image of Dev Patel, because I think he's an amazing actor. I think he's like obviously very handsome, but I think that he has this sort of wisdom to him and the ability to tap again into these like this really deep and complex range of emotions in his performances. And, you know, Lion is one of my favorite movies, and I think that he's just like excellent in that movie. I haven't seen The Green Knight, but one of the things that I just sort of inherently feel with him as an actor is he has this like nobility to him. And a lot of this stuff, you know, kind of came about organically or intuitively, But Zia very quickly slotted into an Aragorn archetype in my mind, where he is the ranger who becomes king kind of thing. And so, he goes on this long sort of journey of growth where, he starts as this sort of like scholar philosopher that's like a warrior at the same time, and he's this ranger and he's worldly in this way that Nairi isn't, but he also sees something in her that he really like wants to understand, and it's her connectedness. One of the things that has sort of emerged organically as well with this pairing is like that Nairi's earthiness like mixes really well with his sort of more cerebral like understanding of the world. Like I always knew that Zia was going to be like a scholar, because everybody who is within his group, they're essentially like Benedictine monks, but in 300 years in the future. Like they're like sort of like story keepers and knowledge keepers who have been collecting music and books and films and relics of the past to kind of try to have like a Library of Alexandria. I'm not going to give too much away about that, but knowing that he was going to be a very like intelligent and like cerebral character, when I was first writing him, he was so kind of boring and like lame. And like once I realized that the way that I had written the story initially was like fundamentally broken, it opened up the opportunity for me to introduce him immediately as this ranger. And then so it's like at first you're like, okay, this guy's like a warrior, he's like a soldier. And then you start to realize that it's like he's so much more than that. And then over the course of the entire series, he's much, much more than that. He goes from the ranger to the king. Around the time when I was first conceiving of this story, Jake and I were watching Lost, and it was like my first time ever watching Lost. And I loved the character of Saeed. And I thought just like Naveen Andrews was such an interesting performance with that character. And so that I was like, oh, that's a good like uncle for Zia's character, and his name is Ursu. And Ursu is also, over time, as I sort of learned more about him, he's sort of the classic like mentor figure, but I really, really found Luthen Rael in Andor to be such an interesting character that has so much more complexity than just like a regular mentor character, because of the fact that like some of his behavior and his decisions hurt people and like cause a great deal of harm, but he has this like conviction of like that the rebellion must be successful at any cost. And so I found that dynamic to be really, really interesting, and so I sort of have like layers of that within this character of Ursu. But really, he's a mentor, he's like the old wise man, and he's a teacher. And then, just to talk about like another character, she's going to be a lot more important in books 2 and 3, but I wanted to introduce her in book 1. Her name is O'Rylan, and she is like very, very much based off of Clea in Andor. I love the actress, I love her performance, and it was just so inspiring to me as far as this character, because but it's just been so interesting, because it's like, as I've allowed myself to sort of let actors inform me, it's also allowed me to let their performances in other stories inform me as well. And so, while this character of O'Rylan, there's like aspects of her that are similar to Clea, like her ultimate like purpose in the plot is really, really quite different, but it still nevertheless like inspired me to give her like a deeper backstory and a lot more. She's going to take up a lot more page time in the story because she has a really integral role to play. And yeah, she's really becoming one of the most interesting characters that I have, and I'm really excited to explore her more in books 2 and 3, because there was something about like the Elizabeth Delau's performance that I just found to be so like sharp and quick and like stern and stoic, and she has this sort of like this wall up on her, this fierceness that I really, really wanted to explore. And then but then she also has this like tenderness, and there's like this like kindness and sort of fear underneath it all, this child who was like orphaned. And I just think that there's something so interesting about that characterization, and so I wanted to sort of play with that and explore it. But yeah, and then I'm just going to kind of show on screen some of the other like character dream casting that I have, without going into too much detail. But it's like I have a character named Elijah who's Nairi's cousin, who's like, he's going to play a big role in the story as well. And then, I have other characters who are going to be coming in who are going to be a lot more important later on in the story as well. Like I have Mayra. She is the sister of Nairi's betrothed, and she's going to play a huge role in book 2. I'm imagining her as Margaret Qualley because I wanted her to be this very sort of like beautiful and ethereal and like this sort of like innocence, like sort of like a Mary figure in a sense. Really bad things are going to happen to her. I wanted her to juxtapose Nairi a bit because, Florence Pugh is such a like, she looks like fierce and strong, just like inherently, just by like looking at her. But Margaret Qualley has like softer features. She's taller and like more delicate looking, and I never wanted Nairi to like be delicate. She has a lot of femininity, but it's like an earthy femininity. I wanted those two characters to juxtapose each other. But then it's like, random things will happen where it's like, I randomly had this other character that I introduced in my second draft, but she didn't have any sort of like characterization at all. And then I was like, I should kind of make use of this character. If I'm gonna like bring her up at all, I should like have her do more things. And so I ended up having her in some sequences in Act 2, and I'm realizing as I'm like describing her physicality, I'm like, oh, I'm kind of like already describing her like Sadie Sink a bit. And if I'm gonna do that, then thinking of the characters that Sadie Sink is so good at playing, it's like I might as well inject some of that into this character. Her name is Asia, and make her more dynamic, make her more interesting, make her have more of a personality too. And so, I guess I just share all of this to say that like, if this is a process that may help you come up with characters by, maybe you get like an outline of the character. You have like an outline of the character, and then all of a sudden you're watching something and you're like, oh, that actor like slots into that. It's actually like a really interesting way to sort of like have this like interface between actors and films and stories that can help really inspire a lot of different directions of things, and also help inspire voice. I've found that it's really helped me with my character voice, because I really don't want anyone to walk away from my book feeling like all of my characters sound exactly the same. And there's certain places where I can tell I need to do a lot of work on that. Having them have a voice that is inspired by an actor or a character's actual voice has been really, really helpful for me, and it's inspired a lot of things. It helps me visualize things a little bit better. It helps me sort of choreograph the scenes in my head a little bit better to be able to imagine their physicality. And so yeah, I just wanted to share that and see if that is like at all helpful. And yeah, you'll probably notice like the characters that the actors that I've chosen are like the biggest actors in the world right now. And so it's like, like, of course, I'm imagining one of the characters looking like Jacob Elordi. It's like, why not? Now, as far as NaNoWriMo has gone, I will say that I think it has gone pretty well. I am going to try, I think, to write a little bit more today. It's going to be a little hard for me to get in the mood because I normally write just in the mornings, like first thing in the morning. But, right now I'm at 79,706 words, and that is pretty close to my goal of 85,000 words for the month. And so I'm feeling pretty good about that. Even if I can't get all the way up to 85,000 words, I'm okay with that, because I have entered a point in the story where it is like full drafting. Like I'm drafting fucking hard right now. And so it's gonna take time. And of course, everything takes more time than you think. So I am like giving myself the space to be like, okay, yeah, this is gonna take a little bit of time. And so I'm bumping my goal back, where I'd like to be done with this draft by the end of the year. And ideally it would be awesome if I was done as far as like I have like written the entire thing, and I've gone through and done like one line and copy editing pass before I send it to beta readers, because I want to make sure that I'm giving the best quality piece of work to beta readers, because it's going to be such a big deal to do this beta reader pass. I don't want to be giving them something that I know there's like a lot of things that I would change. I don't want to go too crazy, because I know I'm inherently going to have to change things. But, there are certain things where it's like, well, if I know a certain problem exists, I don't want to give it to them because then maybe they'll just like point it out and I'll be like, oh no, and then that's kind of like a waste of their energy. And so yeah, so we're gonna see how that goes. But yeah, right now I'm feeling pretty proud of myself for like how much I accomplished this month. Like it's pretty crazy. I mean, I'm looking at freaking 200 pages on this document right now. Like I've never written this much before. And so I am pretty stoked and I feel really, really good about the length of the book, because right now I'm like Act 3 hasn't even started. And I'm talking about like this like 200 like document pages. That is not how long the book actually is. The book is much longer than that. The book, if I get up to 120,000 words, that could be like a 500-page book. And so yeah, it's exciting. Interested to see how it turns out. If you made it this far in the video, tell me about how your NaNoWriMo went. Did you participate in NaNoWriMo? Did you write anything? I'm curious how your NaNoWriMo went, like if you had the goal to do the 50,000 words or if you kind of had a different goal and how all of that went. I know for me, things have been really crazy, and so I'm surprised and impressed that I was actually able to get as far as I did in this draft. And so yeah, would just love to hear about how you are doing and how your process has been. I hope that me explaining how I have been doing my characters was helpful, and yeah, happy writing. Thank you so much for watching.